British literature with interests in feminist and post-colonial studies. She received a PhD in English from Emory University in 1999 and an AB from Harvard University in 1987. She's the author of Narrative Settlements, Genre and Geography in British Women's Fiction, 1918 to 1939, University of Toronto Press, 2005. She's currently working on a project called Rum Histories, which examines rum in the literature of the Anglo-Caribbean and Caribbean writers from the US, England, and Canada. In addition to writing and lecturing about Downton Abbey, she's writing about the film Avatar and novelist James Joyce. Prior to joining the faculty at Penn State, she taught at Wilkes University in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Dr. Nesbitt is a Winchester native, well, born in Cambridge, who graduated from Winchester High School in 1983. Before pursuing her graduate work, she worked in Washington, D.C. and New York as an arts administrator. She lives with her spouse, Tom, a Georgia native, 2 teenage daughters, Madeline and Charlotte, 3 cats, and 1 dog in York, Pennsylvania. She enjoys running and tennis. She traces her love of British fiction back to the day she received a jam-covered copy of The Secret Garden for her birthday. Her godmother's jar of homemade jam broke en route. My mom wiped down the sticky red book and read aloud the first chapter before bedtime. Before she could resume, I had taken matters into my own hands. Please welcome Jen Nesbitt.
So I'm very pleased to be here to speak today and share my enthusiasm for Downton Abbey, the most popular drama PBS has seen in recent memory. And so first, I just want to make sure, here we go. Can you all hear me? Sorry, I couldn't resist. This is my favorite slide. So how many of you have watched all 3 seasons of Downton Abbey? Okay. Are there any cheaters in the room? We watched season 4 on in some illegal manner on the internet. Very good. Please do not wreck it for the rest. So what I'd like to do today is review some of the key themes from Downton's earlier seasons, and then I'm going to use publicly released casting and plot information to speculate about plot development in season 4. I've interspersed a few trivia questions to test your knowledge so you can help me along, and I'm happy to take some questions afterwards. I love to talk about this stuff. So first, our recap. In season 1, we met Lord and Lady Grantham, also known as Robert and Cora Crawley. In the British peerage, last names and titles are not the same thing. So the Crawleys have 3 daughters, named Mary. Sybil, very good. Robert's mother, the Dowager Countess, also known as Violet, completes the Crawley family group until Matthew Crawley, the heir to Downton, comes on the scene. Downstairs we have, who's the butler? Carson, very good. And the housekeeper is? Mrs. Hughes. And there's the staff. And then, of course, because the kitchen staff is not allowed to come upstairs ever, apparently, we have Mrs. Patmore and Daisy in a separate shot. Now, these 2, Carson and Mrs. Hughes, head up the staff at Downton Abbey, which is the Earl's seat in Yorkshire. And in the course of 3 seasons, Downton Abbey has chronicled the lives and loves, the tragedies and the triumphs of both the family and the staff. So by the end of season 3, the Downton family and staff have weathered a war, an influenza epidemic, financial reversals, wrongful imprisonment, and sex scandals. Not to mention the tragic deaths of Sybil in childbirth and Matthew in a sports car. Season 4 picks up 6 months after the dreadful events of September 1921, running from February 1922, which I understand that Valentine's Day will be playing a prominent role, through to spring and summer of 1923. What, we are all wondering, is in store for the Crawleys and the people who work for them. The first thing we need to remember is that Downton Abbey is, at its heart, all about inheritance. The plot is specifically about who will inherit the estate and its considerable goodies, but also, by extension, the leadership of England. So the deeper question is, who is the most appropriate steward for Downton in a 20th century world? Who can squire Downton and England through the upheavals of the early 20th century, which in the series is most prominently represented by World War I, into the modern world? Now, Downton Abbey is set at the real Highclere Castle, right here, and it's emblematic of the great estates of England. The Earl of Grantham owns considerable agricultural acreage as well as the land on which the village sits. He sits in the House of Lords, as all those with hereditary titles do, and his financial and administrative power in the county are nearly absolute. You may remember how he disposes of Mr. Carson's former music hall partner, who has presumed upon his connection to my lord's butler. Now here's a toughie for you. What is the name of the vaudeville-ish duo that Mr. Carson was a part of? Reach way, way back. The Cheerful Charlies. Anyway, this is what happens when you have to watch this. Okay. You may also remember the deference shown to Sybil and to Tom on the Earl's behalf, despite their involvement with what the British government would clearly see as Irish treason. The Earl exercises immense control, even at his weakness, as this clip from season 3 shows. Now, Laura, hang on just a sec. Lord Grantham is discussing housing options should he be forced to sell Downton Abbey. Now we can go. Hello. Do you want me to leave the volume on? Yeah.
I don't know exactly. Desirable nobleman's mansion with surrounding estate and properties.
Where will you go?
We have some land further north at Area Home on the border with Durham. It came with my great-grandmother. The house is pretty and we might make something of it. We could always rename it Downton Place.
Who lives there now?
A tenant, but we can come to an arrangement that keeps him happy.
Thanks. The desire of the tenant is not going to count for much. The Earl's prerogatives will stand, and the ruffled tenant will his feelings will either disappear with the application of money or tough luck. And there will still be plenty of money, even with, 3/4 of the fortune gone. Yet in the early 20th century, the prerogatives of the aristocracy were challenged on many fronts. Agricultural income, on which a lot of aristocratic wealth depended, declined due to the expansion of farming in the United States, and death duties, otherwise known as probate taxes, were introduced in 1894 and increased after the Great War, which is what the British called World War I, and so that interfered with the transfer of wealth across the generations. Other factors were also straining the aristocracy's hold on power. Over the course of the 19th century, 3 reform bills had expanded the voting population, and the establishment of county councils in 1888 limited the aristocracy's role in local affairs. In 1909, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's the equivalent of the Secretary of the Treasury in the United States, proposed changes to land taxation, which angered the House of Lords. Now, this is David Lloyd George, and the Dowager Countess is always talking about how he doesn't want to hear his name. He's such a horror to him. Anyway, he proposed a change to land taxation, and the House of Lords summarily vetoed this proposal in a move that was perceived as so self-interested that their veto power was withdrawn in the 1911 Parliament bill, giving us the British governmental structure we're familiar with today. Now, if you'll notice, there are similarities between this architecture and that of Highclere Castle, and they're both done by the same person. So, even the good-hearted aristocrats like the Crawleys must adapt to modern ways. And one of the more organic methods of infusing the new into the old is through marriage. Scholars of the country house novel, a genre to which Downton Abbey owes a great deal, have shown that the aristocracy maintained its power through intermarriage generally, but also by strategically marrying in women who represent classes or groups that might otherwise override the nobility's economic and political power. And Lady Cora is an example. The British peerage may have despised what they call trade, but they did like money. So there are numerous cases of British peers trading a title for American cash. And the companion volume to the series, The World of Downton Abbey, offers up Mary Leiter, quote, the daughter of a fantastically rich Chicago real estate speculator, unquote, as a model for Cora. But there are many others, including Lady Elmira, who lived at Highclere Castle. Downton Abbey gives us another strategy, settling the estate on a middle-class professional who, though initially unwilling, learns to honor aristocratic values and uses his business skills to preserve the estate. In the first season of Downton, set in 1912 and running to the declaration of war in 1914, the inheritance theme is announced in grand style with Titanic panic. Not one, but both heirs to the Downton estate and title are among the 1,502 people who die in a disastrous encounter between the largest ship afloat and an iceberg in the North Atlantic. It may be significant that a ship that was to demonstrate man's faith in technological progress kills off the heirs to an estate founded on and funded by agriculture. The death of Lord Grantham's heirs, James and Patrick, is even more threatening because Patrick was engaged to Lord Grantham's eldest daughter, Mary. Typical Mary pose. Although she is the eldest child, Mary cannot inherit Downton because she is a girl. The estate is entailed from, and I quote, heir male to heir male, as the Elizabethans would put it, from father to son, or should sons be lacking, cousins like Patrick or Matthew. And while many modern viewers may find the idea of Mary engaged to her cousin distasteful, or at least odd, this type of intermarriage was not unusual in the aristocracy, and certainly it allowed families to preserve financial resources for daughters who would otherwise be impoverished on the death of their father. Anyone who has seen or read Pride and Prejudice knows that entails can have ugly consequences for women. And series creator Julian Fellows plays to his likely audience in setting up this inheritance plot. Entails were not outlawed until 1925 and in England, and there are real-life counterparts to Mary Crawley. For example, the Sackville family was in and out of court during this period over the inheritance of Knoll, an enormous, rambling estate immortalized in Virginia Woolf's novel Orlando. In the early teens, Victoria and Lionel Sackville West fought off the claims of a cousin, and they were supported by testimony from their daughter Vita, right here. Vita is notorious in other ways, another talk. And yet, due to the entail, Vita, who loved this house, could not inherit, and the estate went to Lionel's brother, Charles. When the house later was deeded over to the National Trust after World War II, Sackville West lamented her loss yet again. Quote, if only I had been Dada's son instead of his daughter. Vita actually later took pride in the fact that Sissinghurst, the estate she and her husband purchased, had been owned by a Sackville sometime in the distant past. And if you're gardening fans, you may know of Sissinghurst. She made it into a big gardening site. But back to Downton Abbey. The question in season 1 is, who will succeed the current Earl? Oops. Matthew or Mary? Mary as successor would advance the cause of women, ending a sexist legal structure while maintaining the class hierarchy, while Matthew as successor dilutes class structures but retains the tradition of male primogeniture. The solution is, of course, to marry the two, literally and figuratively. Mary will temper Matthew's crassly practical business mind with her inborn noblesse oblige, while he will inject some much-needed method and economy into the estate's workings. Robert Crawley and even Mary will fuss about prerogatives occasionally, but they always come around. And indeed, at the end of season 3, the Earl's cousin Shrimpy confirms that modernization has probably saved Downton. Shrimpy's beautiful Scottish castle, Donegal, will be sold. And he says, "If I'd had any gumption and modernized as you did." He could have saved Donegal, quote, "but I sat on my hands as the money drained away," unquote. And the horrible consequence of this is that he's going to have to take a diplomatic post in India. See? Bad idea. All right, so the ability to modernize with grace also flavors the upstairs-downstairs drama that has generated so much interest in Downton Abbey. We may delight in the operations of the house upstairs, anything from choosing the right tiara to filtering port wine. But one of the real pleasures of the show is watching the characters struggle with or discover modern conveniences we find normal. So Carson can't work a telephone, and even the indomitable Lady Violet is terrified of electricity. Most of these people cannot even drive, right, at the beginning of the season. And in later episodes, we see Lady Mary and Anna experimenting with curling tongs, which are the predecessors to the curling iron, and Mrs. Hughes testing out an electric toaster. So what we get with Downton is the ability to see how and whether these characters, high and low, will become more like us, more mobile, more technologically advanced, and more socially flexible. In the process, viewers get a sense of the intricacies and subtleties of operating a great estate, and the opening sequence of season 1 is masterful in this regard, and this is the one you mute. Here we go. A routine like clockwork and servants are part of the mechanism. Despite this smoothly filmed opening, the reality of domestic work was backbreaking. Tasks included scrubbing pans and dishes, up to 500 items perhaps after a particularly elaborate dinner party, carrying coal and firewood, laying fires and sweeping out ashes, and scrubbing floors and stairways, often by hand, on one's knees. A servant's day might begin at 6 and end after 11, only to begin all over again the next day, 7 days a week. According to David Poole, author of What Jane Austen Ate and Charles Dickens Knew, time off frequently consisted of 2 weeks per year, a half day on Sunday, an evening once a week, and a day once a month. Domestic service remained a huge employment category until after 1945, particularly for women. So the staff at Downton, which is heavy on the women, replicates the usual arrangements. Of the 1.4 million people engaged in domestic service in 1911, only 3% were male. In 1911, having a servant was not that unusual, but having several was. 800,000 English families had servants, but only 1/5 of these had more than 3 servants. So you can see how wealthy this family is from that. Now, Downton Abbey chooses a rosier view of upstairs-downstairs relationships, despite the occasional teeth-jarring reprimand or proletarian grumble. Afternoon tea, ooh, here they are. I missed a slide. Maybe I should let you drive, Laura. There they are. Afternoon tea may unite them all, but class matters. The Crawleys live in luxury, devoting themselves to such leisure activities as hunting, fishing, needlework, reading, dressing, and dining. Meanwhile, those downstairs who make the Crawley lifestyle possible sleep 2 to a room and begin their labors hours before the family wakes, all with the goal of rendering their work invisible. Humorous reversals as when Mrs. Patmore and Daisy teach Sybil to boil water, literally, or the close relationship between Anna and Mary do not equality make. No wonder Gwen, this is Gwen from the first season, the maid with the typewriter, prefers to seek secretarial work. And this is another example of all the servants and Carson looking at this strange, devilish device, the typewriter. Now, in 1912, when the series begins, women were about 2% of clerical workforce. By 1921, they held 8% of these positions. The war accelerates the movement of working class people into new employment. And we are starting to see the staff explore these options. Alfred, one of the new footmen, has shown an interest in becoming a chef. Daisy may learn to manage a farm for her father-in-law. And even a character like the evil lady's maid, Miss O'Brien, someone we associated with the most traditional elements of the class hierarchy, has ambition. She wants to travel. So it remains to be seen how these plot nuggets will develop in season 4. About the upstairs drama, there's more information. We know that Mary, emerging from mourning, will have 2 suitors. Her romances will continue to dominate the plot because she is the guardian of the future Earl of Grantham, that baby. And whoever she marries will have considerable influence on Downton's future. We also know that the acclaimed opera singer, Dame Curie Tikhonowa, is slated for a cameo appearance as a diva invited to sing at a Downton house party. And she is going to play a historical figure. Does anybody know, offhand, famous early 20th century opera singers? Nellie
Melba.
Yeah, Nellie Melba. And coincidentally, it was a crossword puzzle clue, and I was like, oh, okay. Now I'm like, oh, okay. Anyway, so these kinds of private concerts were common practice among the rich then and now, as they are now. I don't know if you remember the brouhaha when everyone learned that Beyonce had given a private concert for the sons of Muammar Gaddafi. And she was like, oh, I gave all the money to the Haitian refugees. So anyway, so it still goes on, which is interesting. Today, I'm going to focus on some of Downton Abbey's subplots, not Mary. And 2 of my subjects come from casting decisions for season 4, and the third comes from setting Lady Edith's developing romance with the editor Michael Gregson in some historical context. Now, the first thing we need to know is that there are 2 babies at Downton Abbey. Sybil, named for her mother, and George, the future Lord Grantham. So here's your trivia question. What other famous British aristocratic couple has named their child George? Oh, Laura, do you know?
Charles. Catherine.
Not Prince Charles, that would be
I'm
weird.
sorry. What's the oldest one's name? William.
Okay, so they're going to need nannies and governesses, and Daisy Lewis has been cast as the governess, and she's appeared in Miss Austen Regrets and done stints on Doctor Who and Lewis. Now, governesses are interesting. They have a storied history in the English imagination. Whether as unjustly downtrodden orphans like Jane Eyre or potentially corrupt women like Miss Jewel of Henry James's Turn of the Screw. Governesses excite the imagination because they stand at the border between the family and the downstairs staff. And so, here you go. Boom. So you can see here, here's the governess, and she's sort of witnessing an intimate moment between the family upstairs. So she's still a paid servant, and she's subject, like the servants, to long hours, restrictions on leave, and also frequently given extra duties. Sewing was a favorite because they're brought up as ladies, so they know how to do fine sewing, so helpful to the family. In addition to her teaching. Now, governesses frequently came, however, from the middle and upper classes, and therefore had a claim to status. But the fact that these women needed paid work revealed a stark reality. Unprotected women without financial resources could lose their status as ladies. In taking on paid work, governesses demonstrated that the Victorian notion of separate spheres for men and women was a precarious structure for women. So to have such a woman installed in your household was a daily, there but for the grace of God go I reminder. And further, the governess role approximated the maternal role, caring for and teaching children, which could cause fears of usurpation. We've already seen what happens when a servant makes eyes at a member of the family. You might remember Edna from season 3. who is going after Tom. In fiction, we see this tension when Mr. Rochester's attraction to Jane Eyre incites Blanche Ingram, his expected marriage partner. She's there on the left. I don't know my left from my right. To disparage governesses in general. So Blanche explains that she and her sisters, quote, have had a dozen governesses at least in our day, half of them detestable and the rest ridiculous, and all of them incubi. So there's a tripled sexual slur here. Incubi are demons who copulate with sleeping women. So Blanche accuses governesses of being demonic, promiscuous, and sexually deviant. So, there is a lot of anxiety. And secondly, Blanche in Jane Eyre is clearly an unpleasant and disagreeable and probably disobedient child, but she reveals another difficulty that a governess might face. The behavior issues could be the fault of the children, as we see in the back there, but doting mamas might lay the blame on the teacher. However, I am sure that baby Sybil will be angelic. Now, the introduction of the governess is the latest element in one of Downton Abbey's major preoccupations, the role of women. Downton began with Lady Mary's shocking premarital sex with a foreigner. Exercising sexual freedom jeopardized Mary's reputation and limited her eligibility on the marriage market. The more decorous aspirations of the housemaid Gwen and the rebellious behavior of Lady Sybil followed. Surely one of the most memorable moments of season 1 is her appearance in the famous harem pants. We've also seen women who break the rules and pay, as in the case of Ethel, whose lapse with a cold-hearted officer leads to dismissal from employment, poverty, and prostitution. All of which brings us to Lady Edith Crawley. I'd like to reconsider the much maligned middle daughter of the Crawley family. Forget the catfights with Mary, even her parents characterized as ghastly. The idea that Edith will remain single and thus be the one to care for them in their old age. In previous versions of this talk, I spent some time discussing Sybil's interest in women's suffrage, the battle for the vote, and in social reform more generally. If you have not seen Downton Abbey Paper Dolls, I strongly recommend it. Very funny. The aforementioned harem pants are the tip of the iceberg. Sybil actively assists Gwen in getting a new position. She becomes a VAD nurse during World War I, and finally she breaks the bounds of her class by marrying Tom Branson, the chauffeur, who is not only below her in status, but Catholic, Irish, and Marxist. All bad things. We root for Sybil as she battles the stodgy and sexist social world into which she has been born. It is not so easy to root for Edith. Superficially, Edith's actions counter everything Sybil does. For example, she is not particularly sisterly or kind to servants. In season 1, she sabotages Mary's reputation by revealing the Camook affair. Further, she sneers at Sybil's interest in suffrage. Well, I hope you won't chain yourself to the railings and end up being force-fed semolina. Now, her remarks refer to the more extreme activities of a wing of the suffrage movement. They did indeed chain themselves to railings, and they also threw slates, tiles, and stones at politicians during public meetings and vandalized shops in the prominent Regent, Bond, and Oxford Street areas. Police jailed some of the women, and they responded with hunger strikes. And they were force-fed, and you can see from the picture on the right that this is not pretty. They're holding her down, they're forcing a tube down her throat. They would often throw up afterwards. So Edith's lack of sympathy for these women does not add charm to her character. Finally, Edith's clothing is dowdy, and she is a stickler for decorum, not apparently very modern or very feminist. But when we look at what Edith actually does, I would argue that her actions are more rebellious, more feminist than Sybil's. Let's start by talking about Sybil's actions in light of interwar feminism. The harem pants. Now, fashion is a feminine arena and where women are allowed to sort of take risks with less fear of reprisal. And also, Sybil's actions are squarely in line with the maternalist strain of interwar feminism. Now, maternalists fought for legislation that promoted and protected women's natural role as wife and mother. And Sybil's actions are invariably helpful and self-sacrificing. She helps Gwen get a job rather than getting one herself, experiencing women's liberation vicariously and without offending her father. She enters the workforce at a time of national emergency, and as a nurse, she devotes herself to wounded soldiers. Now notice her outfit as well, the skirt and the nurse's uniform, because that's important. Now, Sybil is interested in politics, but when she actually experiences the rough and tumble world of politics, she is immediately knocked unconscious. And she is saved not by one, but two male heroes. Her sister, Mary, immediately assumes that Sybil might want to marry one, Matthew, because she's jealous, of course. And she eventually does marry the other, Tom. And yes, her marriage is scandalous. But after the brouhaha, the Bransons settle down to a traditional middle-class marriage. Sybil subsumes her political interest in Tom's, and she tells her sisters. In Dublin, she's just, quote, Mrs. Branson, cooking dinner for her hard-working, radical journalist husband. By contrast, Edith improves her skills for herself independently. Her actions follow the equality model of feminism, which seeks to eliminate female stereotypes. Before World War I, she learns to drive, and her desire to learn this skill is considered frivolous and counter to her duties as an unmarried daughter of the house. During World War I, this skill enables her to escape domestic life. She helps out on one of the estate's farms by driving a tractor. And while her clothing for this work resembles that of the Women's Land Army or the Land Girls, she doesn't join this organization and put herself at the service of the state. So she's not doing anything for anyone. She's picking and choosing what she wants to do herself. And notice the pants. More of a fashion statement than Sybil's silk pants or her nursing uniform. And Edith is shown to take great physical pleasure in her labor. And she also dallies sexually with the farmer in question, but she doesn't seem to have any idea of taking it further. She just kind of does it and then moves on. So that's one element that might make you rethink what Edith is up to. But if you look at the outcomes of their actions, you also see a little bit of change here. Now, Sybil's marriage is happy, but she does die, fulfilling her role as wife and mother. Sybil's death in childbirth may be in keeping with the time. After the war, maternal mortality rates were approximately 1 in 200. And I think latest figures, I cut them out, I'm sorry, 1 in 6,250 is what we have now. So it's a huge difference. Also, her death reverses the political trajectory of her entire family. So Tom and baby Sybil are recruited to secure Downton's future. Tom insists that he and baby Sybil will leave Downton, but the Crawleys play on his desire to do, quote, what Sybil would want, unquote, and stay. And I'm not entirely sure that Sybil would want her daughter to be raised at Downton Abbey, based on her previous actions. In the meantime, Tom becomes Downton's estate manager. Alongside Matthew, he's tasked with modernizing the estate's agricultural business. And now that Matthew is dead, he's primarily responsible for securing Downton's future, and thus, ironically, upholding the institutions that have impoverished and exploited the Irish since 1613. So everything that he was against, he is now working for. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Now, Edith, on the other hand, increases her independence. She begins speaking publicly about women's rights in politics against her father's wishes. She expresses her support for full women's enfranchisement in the United States, differentiating our 19th Amendment from England's more limited enfranchisement. She complains, she says, that she's neither 30 nor a householder, so she can't vote. And she'll have to wait until the flappers vote of 1928 to get her vote. So she writes a letter to the London Times, and it's published. And this leads directly to paid employment as a columnist for the Sketch, which is, in fact, the publication that Lady Cora is reading in the first episode of Downton Abbey. It has the Titanic on the front. Anyway, so in her 1928 feminist manifesto, A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf claims that women need a room and 500 pounds a year to pursue lives free of patriarchal supervision. Now, Edith is probably not earning that much, but she has something that neither of her sisters has ever had, which is an independent income that she earns herself. Edith's actions, however, only pain her family. Throughout the series, she is implicitly and explicitly condemned as selfish and peevish and perhaps even a little crazy because she is jealous and sexually frustrated. And that's when she's not being dismissed as irrelevant. In a Saturday Night Live parody of Downton, they call her the other one. So she's the failure of the family. Here she is. Unable to secure even an aged, one-armed widower for a husband, and doomed to remain a spinster. Yeah, it's all sad. Now, it's important to remember that in the wake of World War I, spinsters were pathologized as frigid and frustrated simultaneously, sick and possibly sexually deviant. Women in England were strongly encouraged to go, quote, back to home and duty, unquote, after the war. So ceding their places in offices, driver's seats, and factory floors to the returning soldiers. 775,000 women left industrial and clerical positions within a year after the war ended, okay? Then they had all been recruited while the men were away. Legislation like the Restoration of Pre-War Practices Act enforced preferential hiring of men, and the munitions industry fired women as they fired their women workers, and their declining demand for, say, bullets provided a reason. And then when they refurbished themselves and returned to their pre-war functions, they would just hire men. As historian Deidre Beto states, quote, by 1920, it was considered willful and perverse of a woman to wish to earn her own living, unquote. So Edith is taking on paid work at a time when women were being coerced into returning to normal female duties after the upheaval of World War I. So perhaps she makes a smart choice in championing the plight of unemployed ex-servicemen in her first column. She talks about it. So here's my question. How is Edith to be shielded from the prevailing idea that single women are sick and crazy? I would argue that the answer lies in Mr. Gregson's mad wife. Michael Gregson, yes, it's true. He has a crazy wife. Michael Gregson is Edith's editor, and he's married to what he calls, and I quote, a woman who doesn't even know who I am. Does the law expect me to have no life at all until I die? Life has been unfair to Mr. Gregson, as it was to Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre, and also to T.S. Eliot, whose wife was also mentally ill, and frequently the subject of a lot of finger pointing. It's like, oh, that man is such a talented artist. It's so terrible that he has such a horrible wife. I mean, you hear a lot of that. So anyway, Mr. Gregson's wife has not fulfilled her natural duty to provide him with a happy home. And his wife is clearly mad, not just suffering from neurosis or hysteria, which were common female psychological complaints of the time. In contrast with Mrs. Gregson, Edith's actions could be considered self-sacrificing. She is redressing the wrong done by an inferior specimen of womanhood. Now, Gregson complains about the law. In this case, he can't divorce his wife. But usually it's the husbands who benefit from marriage laws that confirm their authority over their wives. Mary Wollstonecraft, who's an early, late 18th century, we'll call her, feminist, vilified for her journalism, She wrote a novel called Mariah, or The Wrongs of Woman. And the novel features a protagonist whose husband wrongly commits her to an asylum so that he can control her fortune and sleep around. So feminist scholars have in fact traced this habit of reconfiguring women who complain or refuse to toe the line as crazy and committing them. I hope this hasn't happened to anybody. Anyway, so this category of madness has been used historically to suppress women's legitimate complaints about gender discrimination or explain away women's unhappiness under these conditions. So supposedly mad women, like witches, wise women, suffragettes, and battered women, could be ignored. Quote, "The rantings of a mad woman are irrelevant. Her anger is impotent." So, what I'd like to suggest, without appearing callous to poor Mr. Gregson, is that the mad wife works to position Edith as appropriately feminine and balanced, like she seems normal in comparison. So this is actually the term that Edith and Mr. Gregson agree on for the tone of her column, the balanced view of the mature woman, something like that. It's crazy. Anyway, but without this invisible mad woman, now remember, we've never seen her, so we have no opportunity to sympathize with her by seeing what she looks like. Edith's behavior might be too much to countenance in the world of Downton Abbey. So that's one thing. And after all, we could see Gregson's explanations as a variant of the story with which Terence Markendale plies young Lady Rose McClare. This is what Lady Rose tells Matthew about her lover. Quote, "He's terribly unhappy. It's not his fault at all. His wife is absolutely horrid." Matthew, an experienced solicitor after all, responds, quote, "Married men who wish to seduce young women always have horrid wives," unquote. So he recommends meeting the lady in question. And Edith, in fact, does investigate Gregson's background. She finds out that he's married after he starts flirting with her. And so is she sneaky, like a woman? Like, is that her ickiness? Or is she smart, like a lawyer? Right? Figuring things out. Now, the gullible Lady Rose brings us to the final new plot twist I will explore today, the introduction of a black character. We met Lady Rose in season 3 of Downton Abbey. She's a bright young thing, eager to take advantage of modern pleasures, and her behavior predictably shocks her family. The affair is the least of it. How about going to racially integrated dance clubs? And this one we can have sound for.
This is like the outer circle from Dante's Inferno.
The outer circle. There she is. Heavens, what a transformation.
Okay. In season 4, Rose is moving to Downton Abbey while her parents travel to India. And she's going to bring her madcap spirit with her. Carnival and PBS have announced that Gary Carr, who has previously appeared in Death in Paradise, which is another PBS show, has been cast as Jack Ross, and there he is, looking debonair, a jazz singer from Chicago. Now, the American connection is very important because it links the flowering of African American culture in the United States in the 1920s and 30s to similar developments in Europe. In the 1920s and the 30s, we have both the jazz age and the era of the Harlem Renaissance. African American artists and writers came to the fore, and here they are. Here are some of them. That's Zora Neale Hurston, and below her, that's I'm about to talk about it more, but here I am, Paul Robeson. Underneath there is Langston Hughes, whose play The Black Nativity is, I guess, currently playing as a film right now. And then Jacob Lawrence, who did a famous series of paintings about the Great Migration. And I'm sorry I don't have a picture of him, but I love his paintings, so I gave you a painting. So all this is all becoming very prominent. And the Club Deluxe opened in Harlem in 1920 and changed its name to the Cotton Club in 1923. And like the nightclub we just saw in that clip, This club featured black entertainers such as Bessie Smith, Cab Calloway, Louis Armstrong, just a few of them, and a whites-only clientele. So you saw in that clip that the musicians are on the stage and all the people are, they're separated but integrated sort of. So Europeans shared this fascination with African American culture. Josephine Baker's Revue Negre arrives in Paris in 1925, delighting and outraging audiences. So you can see that this would have been a little outre for the Lady Rosalinds of the world. Paul Robeson, who you saw before, is a famous black actor, singer, and activist. And he debuted in London in 1922 and spent considerable time in England through the Second World War. This is him in one of his most famous roles as, of course, Othello. He also is well known for his work on Showboat, and he brought that production to Paris later, in London later, after the current Downton Abbey time. So can't use that yet. Anyway, he was present at the most exclusive events and addresses in London, Mayfair, Ascot, and he, like opera singers and other entertainers, like Dame Nellie Melba before, gave concerts in private homes, and so that's kind of how he enters the picture in Downton Abbey. Now, the fascination with African American art and culture was paired with a pervasive legalized racism. In the United States, there were increases in lynching in the 20s, discriminatory practices known as Jim Crow were the law of the land. In England, they call it the color bar, and it's an institutionalized racism that stung doubly after black troops supported the war effort. Like women, black British people gained employment opportunities during World War I, and they were particularly crucial in the Navy's merchant service. There were a lot of sailors and mariners, and they were able to fill in. Also, men from the colonies in Africa, India, and the West Indies served in the war. The West Indian Regiment lost nearly 1,300 men. Like women, however, these men were snubbed when white Englishmen were demobilized. Race riots over unfair labor practices occurred in 1919. Claude McKay, a Jamaican-American poet who is Britain's first black reporter, claimed that prejudice was, quote, almost congenital in the English, noting that they stereotyped black people as entertainers, boxers, Baptist preachers, or menials. So it's a similar situation, allows us to identify across the pond. So we can expect some unkindness as jazz singer Jack Carr makes his way at Downton, but the emphasis will be on the glamour of the jazz age. The series has been attentive to dance fads in England, and the trend will continue in season 4. But Robert Graves and Alan Hodges, writing about interwar entertainment, note that, quote, jazz in the early 20s meant heavily punctuated, relentless rhythm, with drums, rattles, bells, whistles, hooters, and twanging banjos. The wild, melancholy saxophone and trumpet had not yet come to England. Dances included the twinkle, the jog trot, the vampire, the Missouri walk, and the shimmy. The black bottom and the Charleston arrive a bit later. So, knowing Julian's fellows, there is no chance that Lady Grantham will break into a Charleston. And this is the kind of detail that makes Downton Abbey so fascinating to watch, whether it's part of the plot lines or just passing references like the toaster. So I was wondering, what might we hear about in season 4? Skywriting, maybe? It was introduced in 1922. Perhaps the Earl will mention the Genoa Conference, which was called to determine Germany's ability to pay war reparations, or the January 1923 occupation of the Ruhr Valley by the French. Edith and Michael might discuss the publication of T.S. Eliot's poem The Wasteland and James Joyce's novel Ulysses. Both of these modernist masterpieces appeared in 1922. We might hear about the 1922 expedition to Mount Everest, the first in which climbers used bottled oxygen. And will Daisy be terrified by the Pharaoh's curse? In 1923, The tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered in Luxor. And when the leader of the expedition died a month later, rumors of a curse began to circulate. The leader of that expedition was Lord Carnarvon. You ready? This is where he lived. You may recognize it. Thank you all very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions. Questions from the populace?
Well, we got 5.
Yes.
Has Matthew gone on to do something else? Why did they kill him?
Matthew and Sybil.
I'm still breathing.
I'm the only person who's perfectly happy that he's dead. It's Dan Stevens did not want to renew his contract. And Julian Fellows has stated that had he been willing to come back and do the occasional cameo, they would have done something else. They would have, sent him on a diplomatic mission to Europe or something. I mean, they would, but he wanted out, so they had to kill him. Sybil also wanted out. Well, think of it. This made them, and in some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, you see Dan Stevens filming in a site that's apparently specially maintained to do World War I reenactments, like their trenches and such like things. And he's having the time of his life, and he, I think, wanted to pursue roles that were more physically demanding. And but at the time that he was killed off on the series, he was already in New York doing a play called, it was Washington Square, I think. And so another costume drama, but it got him over here. So that's all. Same reason that O'Brien will be disappearing as well.
Oh, no.
Pardon me? So they didn't sign the contract. So they had to figure out some way to do it. Yes.
What was the connection between O'Brien and the male servant? She seemed to be, they helped each other, but what was...
Thomas?
Yes.
Well, they have a love-hate relationship. I mean, they're both nasty, scheming people, and they're interested in their own power, I think. But that all goes to heck, as they say in the 3rd season, when her nephew is hired as a footman, and Thomas won't help him jump up and become a valet. So Thomas is, I think, a really interesting character. He's so very self-interested, and yet they allow him to show a kind of ethical sense that is, very much at odds with his completely unethical behavior. So he's a fascinating guy. He gets his own page in the 2014 calendar, just in case you know. Yes.
Will there be a season 5?
Yes, I believe so. I can't remember I did a lot of this work originally for my local PBS station, and I think she emailed me and said, and there's going to be a season 5. So I think I can feel confident in saying yes. So, if any, I think season 4 went over pretty well in Britain, or is going over.
Have you caught anything that was completely wrong in terms of a reference or a behavior? Or are they that good?
I think this is where I say I'm not much of a historian. So those little details would probably go by me. There have been several things. Well, one, the dialogue has been critiqued for being completely modern compared to what they would have said. But I actually think that they do that on purpose, that they have visual accuracy, but they want these people to seem modern to us, and so they introduce these little statements like Matthew tells Tom, he's been on a steep learning curve. Well, this phrase was actually current at the time, but only in this very narrow psychological social science discourse. So people are like, oh, no, it existed. Yeah, but not as slang. so there's that. The people who seem to find the most inaccuracies are my friends in the medical profession. Apparently Mrs. Patmore would have had these really thick glasses after having her cataracts redone, and she has them for, I think, a couple of episodes, and then bye-bye. And of course, there's the famous Matthew's recovery from his spinal cord injury. Very unlikely. Very, very unlikely that he would have. Well, that he would have even survived, because they didn't have the same kind of sanitation and prevention of bacterial infections at that time, and so immobilized soldiers would have, risked kidney infections and other types of things that could have killed them very easily. And in one of the background videos on the third season DVD, they have poor Dan Stevens says, he's like talking like this the entire time. Like, well, Julian did his research, and apparently there are instances when people recovered. He's clearly very uncomfortable with the whole idea. But he says what he has to say. So there's always a justification, but it's not likely. But it's a melodrama in many ways, a soap opera, and so I go with it. So,
One
yes.
person you didn't talk about was Matthew's mother.
Yes.
I love her. And also the brilliance of the Dowager, and how those go at it.
Yeah.
And I set many things in motion.
It's been suggested that I spend some time on Isabel Crawley in my next iteration, because she actually is a very modern figure, and she comes at it from even earlier than the young women who are the focus of the drama. I love Maggie Smith too, and they do exercise a lot of power behind the scenes. So I don't know what I can say to you except that, yeah, they're awesome. I haven't talked about women in the professional. Yes?
Will Cora's mother reappear? I can't remember who's the actress?
Shirley MacLaine. Yeah, she's coming back, and she's apparently bringing Cora's brother with her.
Oh, no.
And I understand that he's a bit of a dilettante, a young man with lots of money and some interests, but doesn't really do much in particular. I think he's going to be fascinating. So I don't know how long they're going to be there, but she's slated to make a return. Yeah. Yes.
Have you followed the development of how much the money has affected the present day Abbey? How much the money has allowed present day owners to do the roof and the rug in the main room are seen in episode 3. Some of the things, and they discovered in one of the entrances to 2 rooms hideaway that actually contained some of the leftover remnants of that of the Egyptian tombs.
Oh, really?
Just they discovered.
I haven't followed it to that. I didn't know that. But the uptick in visitors to the castle, yes, and apparently they started accepting reservations on February 1, and they were just sold out for the entire season very quickly. So yeah, it's been a huge moneymaker, and she's apparently, she's put out a couple of books, the current countess, and she's doing a cookbook, and there's a line of soap and household products that are supposed to come out. And there's supposed to be a release of a Downton Abbey line of fashions, which it's not associated with her, but with Highclere Castle, but yes, so you can dress like the Dowager Countess. Or Mary, or Edith, I don't know. Maybe it'll be like at Ann Taylor, where they have the different fits of pants, so you can buy a Sybil or a Mary. Sorry, that just came to me. So I haven't. That's really interesting. I know that they want to turn it into a hotel or like an executive conference center. So they want to redo some of the rooms, I know
They
that.
they said they'll use any of the facilities they can to generate money, but evidently it's being run as a very, very profitable farm. It's being really run with the pheasants, the gatekeepers that come in and take care of the pheasants. And he, the man, is a very, very knowledgeable and very hardworking earl who intends to pass it on. So tell how much he has spent on renovations, and he intends to pass it on to his heirs.
Well, I think it's one of the few privately held big estates left in the country, so that they're able to do it is amazing. And she works, I mean, inside the house, she works really diligently as well. And I don't know.
They talked about the butler who is at present, who is very down to earth and sometimes works in the, as sales in the bookstore.
Oh, really?
And he tells about the service, every setting is perfect, just like it used to be. But he does a lot of other things that wouldn't have been done by the former butler.
Yeah, that's not something I know too much about. It's a great question, a great idea. Other questions?
We'll say thank you.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.